And it's interesting that you mentioned access to capital as well, circling back a little bit on that, right? Because accessing a license is just the first step of many, right? And going back to Colombia, which is a case that I love, right? I'm very bullish on Colombia, by the way. But they issued a lot of licenses at first, right? And they weren't very expensive to access, right? All you needed was a little bit of capital and access to some land. It could be yours or it could be rented. You just needed to tie it to a specific physical address, right? And a lot of people came to me and said, okay, I have land and I got the license, but then they didn't have the access to capital to develop the property, right? To develop a grow, to compete with the large Canadian companies entering the Colombian cannabis industry and investing 50, 70, 80 million dollars in their facilities, right? That is where they found a roadblock in many occasions, right? You think, okay, I'll set up my grow, I'll get my license, and then it should be cheap to grow. It isn't. And even if it is, right, even if it were, because like, again, Colombia is relatively cheap in terms of production costs. But what happens if you can't export it, if you can't sell it, right? Between 2017 and 2021, most products could not be exported or sold domestically. Flour cannot be sold domestically. You can only sell topicals as dermocosmetics, or you could go through the compound pharmaceutical route. So there's always so many constraints and so many things that you don't expect, you don't envision at first, you don't imagine, you don't plan for, right? So, access to capital is central, right? If you're going to create a law saying, okay, these disadvantaged people will have a priority to access a license, what ends up happening? Well, something we've seen in many countries and many states in the US is the minority applicant, imagine myself, imagine yourself, gets the license, but then someone else buys it from them, right? And they keep a small participation, right? So in the end, what is a social equity program without the access to capital component, right? Is there a way for it to work? And if not, like, what is the solution? I don't know. Is there something that you see as a potential solution to couple with these programs? Is it the state of Jersey investing in these businesses? Is it the state of Jersey finding the right couple, the right investor for each of these projects? Or is it patronizing, right? To go like, okay, I'm sure you don't know how to get capital, right?
Wow. I'm telling you, this is so cool because it's allowing me to reflect over the last year and a half. And as I look back up until today, number one, the social equity applicant. What really bothered me when we got legislation in place back in 2021 was the term social equity applicant. Well, we did not have a defined social equity applicant until August of that year. But what got me was the number of people who emerged as consultants in the industry, right? It births
everyone is a consultant.
Right?
It's like you go on LinkedIn and everyone is a CEO.
Right.
Everyone is a consultant. I mean, over the years, I'm 32 now, and over the last, since 2013, I've probably received, I don't know, 400 or 500 offers to consult.
Right.
On things like finance. And it's like, I do financial analysis, but you need a CPA for what you want here. You need an investment banker. People are like, oh, but the industry, right? Like, everyone is a consultant. You do need operational experience to consult.
Right. But this was unfortunately ingenious. I'm a consultant and I will help you, social equity applicant, get a license.
For a fee.
And now, just because I'm African American, does that make me a social equity applicant? No. But you had people spending at least hundreds of dollars chasing after these consultants, and consultants chasing after people who look like me and who look like you, saying, give me a couple $100 and I'm going to help you get a license. You had no idea if you qualified as a social equity applicant. So that was early on, always bothered me. as to how that came about. Then you fast forward in the conversation about, to your point, I am going to be an applicant, but I need capital. And so now I get into this quote unquote operating agreement. And I sign an operating agreement, and then the notion of, oh my God, this is horrible. Ed, you're being used just for the color of your skin. You're being used. And so that's a horrible thing. Well, I looked at it two ways, Javier. One was the notion of, well, we did in fact need to create oversight, which we did for those operating agreements. But then I did put on the other shoe, and I said, well, what is significant for me may not be significant to you. That operating agreement, maybe I'm bought out in a year, but if I made $1 million, maybe that's a change of quality of life for me.
Yeah.
Right.
It's always a dilemma, right? Do you incorporate into the laws and regulations a certain extended wait period for a minority or equity owned business to be acquired, right? Because on the one hand, then you limit predatory practices, right? But on the other hand, you limit people's ability to exit, right?
Yes.
Maybe the time to exit and to sell your company is within a year for $1 million that you get to keep. And you should be allowed to do that, but at the same time, it's always a tough balance to find, right? And something similar happened, for instance, with women in cannabis in general, right? Maybe I think like 6 years ago, I did this research article for Dope magazine about women executives or women in the C-suite in the cannabis industry. 3 or 4 years later, I looked at the number again, and it had declined considerably, right? Most of the factors were negative, but one of the elements that also had a considerable impact on this figure was the fact that a lot of women-owned businesses had been acquired, right? And that is something to celebrate as well. Of course, the people who had a bunch of money from before and came, to acquire these businesses for millions of dollars tended to be white males, right? But it's always a lot more complex, right? If you look at the number and you go, okay, women in the C-suite are declining, it's bad, right? It's inherently bad. And I would think that, but then you look into the reasons behind it, and most of them are bad, but some of them aren't, right? Some of these businesses were acquired at very good valuations, very fair valuations, sometimes even very generous valuations. And suddenly you had women entrepreneurs who have $5 million in the bank, right? So again, a great dilemma, and I think like the main, or like if we had to select a topic for this conversation, would be like there's no right answer in cannabis. Right?
Right. I love that. There's no right answer. In fact, share with me your thoughts, because I've said things like this.
Mm-hmm.
It is a private sector venture. When you get into cannabis, it is in fact, even though it's a regulated industry, it is private sector. You are subject to the market. It's not socialized, right? And so do you want a socialized market or a socialized industry, or do you want a private sector, private market, capitalist industry? And I don't know if you've ever faced that, but what are your thoughts?
Every day, yeah, that is my discussion every day, right? A lot of old school OG legacy operators, right, complain about it on social media, or when we talk, they go like, okay, we're kicked out of the industry was colonized, right? And that is very true, and it is very unfair, but it is also very American, right? I'm a foreigner, I'm from Argentina, I live in Argentina, I grew up in Argentina, right? So I look at the US from abroad, like most people do in the world, and you go, okay, this is like the birthplace of capitalism. This is the epitome of capitalism, right? So what did you expect would happen if you opened up the industry, right? And then you have other cases, right? Argentina, and I wanted to touch on Argentina because of homegrowing, but we'll get back to that in a second and maybe close it up with that. But in Argentina, we had a law for medical cannabis. The first thing we regulated was home growing, right? We knew that patients needed their medicine right now. So we had You could get a license as a home grower and growing your own cannabis up to 9 plants, or you could um, give your quota of production to a caregiver, right? That is the first thing we regulated. Then we had companies producing at an industrial scale, but all of them had to be created in partnership with some government entity, right? And some people were very pissed at that, right? Especially free market advocates, right? But to me, when I look at it, what I see is these companies were producing accessible medicine that is very much needed, and up to this point, it's either produced artisanally without any controls or imported, and thus very expensive. And these companies were supplying this medicine to the population at an affordable price without thinking of profit as much as they're thinking about the necessity of the patient, right? It also meant that these socially oriented enterprises had a head start, right? That no American or Canadian or Israeli or European company could come in and go like, okay, here's $50 million, I will corner the entire market, right? Now the market is opening up, right? And again, there's no one answer, but if you look at the dynamics of how capitalism plays into the industry, we can either make sure that we regulate it so that no one company can take over it, or we can leave it up to the free market, right? And America loves the free markets, right? But it's always an internal debate that the American society has, where they love free markets until they impact them negatively, right? And suddenly it's like, oh, where's the Fed? Where's the FDA? Where's the this and where's that? Right? And all these different aspects of this conversation, I think, make it again a very complex situation to solve. But honestly, looking at America, it's a capitalistic country, right? Why would we regulate this industry differently? I mean,
I think
I don't know.
Your points are excellent, and thank you for providing that. And so I love your statement. There are no right answers.